Day 1, Hour 0, the raid happened before sunrise. The air had been cool, thick with the smell of diesel and dust. A joint patrol from the US Marines and Iraqi security forces swept through a narrow, labyrinthine district suspected of harboring insurgent leadership. Intelligence had been shaky at best. Whispers from local informants. Talk of a bomb maker, maybe a courier moving money and schematics. When they breached the heavy wooden door, the house was mostly empty. They cleared it room by room, boots crunching on broken tile. They found him in the basement of the half-collapsed home. He was unarmed. He was sitting calmly at a wooden table, illuminated by a single, swinging yellow bulb. Spread out before him was a mess of stripped copper wires, soldering irons, and broken radios. It wasn't a bomb factory. It was a repair shop, but someone had tipped them off. And more importantly, the perimeter guards had seen someone run out the back alley just as the Humvees arrived. But this man hadn't run. He just sat there. That alone made him suspicious. In a city where everyone ran, staying put felt like a trap. The Marines moved in fast. They zip-tied his wrists tightly behind his back, the plastic biting into his skin. They threw a rough burlap sandbag over his head. Through it all, he offered no resistance. No panicked words in Arabic. Just steady, methodical breathing. At the holding point, abandoned schoolhouse, repurposed as a temporary forward operating base, the hood was finally yanked off. Name? Corporal Ruiz asked, wiping sweat from his brow. The man stared forward, blinking against the harsh morning sunlight. He was maybe 40. His beard was trimmed close, graying at the edges. His eyes were dark, deep, and completely unreadable. Name? Ruiz repeated, his voice rising, echoing off the concrete walls. Silence. Ruiz shook his head and walked out. Vance leaned against the doorframe, watching. That was how it started. Hour 6, Sergeant Vance didn't like babysitting duty. He preferred patrols. He preferred movement, action, the clear-cut rules of engagement on the street. Guarding prisoners meant sitting in stale, baking air with the constant, gnawing possibility that the quiet man tied to a rusted radiator pipe in the corner might explode into violence or worse. Be wired to someone outside who would. The schoolhouse had no electricity, just blinding shafts of sunlight slicing through cracked, glassless windows. The air was thick with chalk dust and old memories. The chalkboards still carried faded Arabic writing math equations, perhaps, or grammar lessons from years before the war reached this specific neighborhood. Children had once sat here. Now, stacked sandbags lined the walls, and spent brass casings littered the hallway. Vance sat in a metal folding chair across from the prisoner. His M4 rifle rested comfortably across his thighs. He tapped his fingers against the receiver. "You understand English?" Vance asked. His voice was casual, almost conversational. No response. The man looked at the floorboards, but Vance was observant. He saw the prisoner's eyes shift, just slightly, a micro-reaction to the rhythm of the English words. He understood. Vance leaned back in his chair, the metal creaking under his weight. Good, makes it easier. Still nothing. The heat ticked upward. Hour 12, the interrogation team arrived mid-afternoon. 2 intelligence officers in clean gear, flanked by a local Iraqi interpreter. They didn't waste time. They set up a folding table, opened thick manila folders, and the questions came fast. Are you affiliated with insurgent cells operating in the Jolan district? The first officer barked. The interpreter repeated it in rapid-fire Arabic. Silence. Do you know Abu Karim? The second officer asked. Arabic. Silence. Who ran from the house? We have eyewitnesses. Who went out the back? The interpreter translated. Nothing. The man was a statue. The first officer lost his patience. He slammed a heavy fist onto the wooden desk, cracking the silence like a whip. You're protecting someone. We know what those wires were for. The prisoner stared straight ahead. He blinked once. That was it. After 2 grueling, sweaty hours, the officers packed up their files, thoroughly frustrated. Keep him stable, Sergeant, one officer told Vance as they walked to the door. Let him cook in the heat a bit. We'll try again tomorrow. Vance nodded, stable, like he was a piece of seized equipment. Not a human being. Hour 18. Night. FAL. Less darkness changed everything in FALLUJAH. The oppressive heat broke, replaced by a chilling desert wind. Outside, sporadic gunfire cracked through the streets, the deadly, unpredictable rhythm of the city. Somewhere far off, an explosion rumbled like distant thunder, shaking dust from the ceiling. The prisoner hadn't eaten. He hadn't asked for water. He hadn't shifted his weight once in 18 hours. Vance watched him from the shadows. The stoicism was almost impressive. Finally, Vance stood up, his joints popping, and grabbed his green plastic canteen. He walked over, crouched in front of the man, and held it to his dry, cracked lips. You don't drink, you don't talk. That the plan? Vance asked softly. Starve yourself out. The prisoner hesitated. His eyes darted to Vance, searching for a trick. Then he drank. It wasn't desperate. It was slow, controlled. He took exactly what he needed, then pulled his head back. Vance lowered the canteen, screwing the cap back on. You got a family. No response, but in the dim light of the tactical lantern, something flickered in the man's eyes. A tightening of the eyelids, a suppressed breath, a crack in the armor. Day TWO hour 24, sleep deprivation, was working its ugly magic on both of them. Vance hadn't slept more than an hour at a time. Every sound outside felt amplified. Every shadow in the classroom stretched longer, playing tricks on his peripheral vision. The prisoner finally spoke at dawn. The sky outside was a bruised purple. Not English, Arabic. The words were quiet. A raspy whisper, but firm. The interpreter wasn't there. Vance stared at him, rubbing his exhausted eyes. Say that again. The prisoner repeated it, looking directly into Vance's eyes. Vance searched his memory. He caught only one word he recognized from months of working checkpoints and patrolling markets. Walled child, you have a kid. Vance asked slowly. The man said nothing more, but he didn't look away. For a fleeting second, they weren't a guard and a captive. They were just 2 tired men. Hour 30, the second interrogation was harsher. The officers returned, and they brought visual aids. They slapped glossy satellite images onto the table. They pulled out a grainy, black and white drone shot of someone running from the house during the raid. Is that your brother? The interpreter asked, pointing a pen at the photo. No response. But this time, the prisoner's jaw tightened. The muscles pulsed under his skin. There it was. The first physical sign of emotion. The officers noticed it too. They zeroed in on it like sharks smelling blood. Asterisk, you're protecting him. The lead officer pressed, leaning over the table, his face inches from the prisoner's. If he's building bombs, Americans die. Iraqi police die. If he puts those wires in the road, more children die. The prisoner's eyes flicked upward at that word. Children, that mattered to him. It struck a nerve that physical threats hadn't touched. Hour 36, the first SACH-FT that night. The war came to their doorstep. Mortar fire landed 2 streets away. The high-pitched whistle was followed by a deafening crunch. The blast shook a shower of white plaster dust from the ceiling. One of the remaining glass windows shattered inward, spraying the floor. Vance instinctively dropped low, bringing his rifle up, scanning the dark. He looked at the prisoner. The man had flinched, but not from fear. He had curled his body inward, tucking his chin. From instinct, like someone used to shielding others from falling debris. A second whistle pierced the air. Closer this time, Vance moved toward the doorway to assess the courtyard. He stepped directly under the classroom's main concrete support beam. And in that split second, the world went sideways. The prisoner didn't run. He didn't lunge for Vance's weapon. He twisted awkwardly, violently, with his zip-tied hands, throwing his entire body weight forward. He crashed into Vance, pulling the heavy Marine down to the floor just as the ceiling gave way. Concrete chunks, rebar, and debris slammed into the floorboards with a sickening thud, right where Vance's head would have been. Silence rushed back in, broken only by the ringing in their ears. Thick dust filled the air, choking them. Vance rolled over, coughing. He looked at the prisoner, who was bruised and breathing heavily on the floor beside him. Asterisk. They stared at each other, enemy, protector. Hour 42 after the mortar attack. The atmosphere in the room permanently shifted. Vance walked over to the man. He pulled a combat knife from his vest. The prisoner didn't shrink away. Vance cut the thick plastic zip ties off the man's raw wrists. He replaced them with standard metal police, cuffs locking them loosely. Officially, it was for the prisoner's safety, allowing him to brace himself if the ceiling collapsed further. Unofficially, it was pure gratitude. "You could have let me die," Vance said quietly. Holstering his knife, the prisoner looked at his freed hands, rubbing the chafed skin. He looked up at Vance. Then finally, in broken, heavily accented English, "No more death." 3 words, heavy as the war raging outside. Day 3 hour 48, the interrogators came back with new intelligence. They looked triumphant. The man who ran from the house had been positively identified. He was younger, early 20s, a suspected, highly active bomb maker. Brother confirmed. The officer turned to Vance in the hallway after the session. "He's covering for him. Typical family loyalty." "Maybe," Vance said, looking through the door at the quiet man. "Maybe nothing. If that kid's planting IEDs on Route Michigan, Americans die. He's an accessory." Vance looked back at the prisoner. The man sat still, but the unshakable stoicism was gone. Exhaustion showed now. Not fear, worry. Deep, agonizing worry. Hour 54, the prisoner finally asked for something. Not water, not food, not medical attention for his bruised shoulder. "Phone," he said, looking at the radio on Vance's chest. Vance shook his head, his face sympathetic but firm. "Not happening." Against protocol. The prisoner lowered his gaze to the floor. Then he closed his eyes and whispered something in rapid, melodic Arabic. Vance didn't understand the words, but the cadence, the desperation, it sounded like a prayer. Hour 60, the SIO and FSCO and it came at 3 a.m., the quietest hour of the night. The temperature had plummeted. The prisoner spoke without prompting. staring out the shattered window at the moon. English, broken, halting, but entirely clear. My brother, angry, after Americans came. After father killed, Vance stopped wiping down his rifle. He stayed completely silent, letting the man speak. He built bombs. I fix radios. I tell him, stop. He not stop. The man's hands trembled slightly in the cuffs. Why didn't you run? Vance asked softly. When we kicked the door in, you had time. The man's voice cracked for the first time. The emotion spilled over. If I run, you shoot him. Silence hung heavy in the room. I stay. So you think I am man you want? Vance felt a cold realization wash over him. The man had sacrificed himself. He had sat at that table, surrounded by incriminating wires, acting as a decoy dot to buy his brother time to escape, not for insurgency, not for a cause or a flag or a holy war, for family. Hour 66, command. Received intel on the younger brother's possible location on the other side of the city. A raid was being planned. The radio on Vance's shoulder chattered with tactical updates. Vance stood outside the schoolhouse under a grey, overcast dawn sky. He smoked a cigarette, the cherry glowing bright orange in the gloom. He could say nothing. He could go to his commanding officer and tell them everything the man had confessed. Inside, the prisoner sat quietly, eyes closed, waiting for his brother's fate to be decided. Hour 70, the raid went sideways. Vance listened to the chaotic radio traffic. An IED had been planted in the doorway of the target compound. One Marine was injured, medevac called, but thankfully not killed. The younger brother had escaped through a back alley before the breach. But as the Marines cleared the house, something unexpected was reported over the comms. No bomb materials were found, just empty casings, swept floors, and packed bags. The operation had been dismantled. Days ago, someone had convinced the angry young man to stop. Hour 7-2. Irrelassi orders came down from command just before noon. Insufficient evidence to hold the man in the schoolhouse. The wires were just wires. He was to be transferred to local Iraqi authorities, which meant a likely release within days. Vance walked into the classroom one last time. He held the key to the cuffs. The prisoner stood when he entered. Vance unlocked the metal bracelets. They fell away. They faced each other without restraints now. Two men on opposite sides of a global conflict. Your brother, Vance said carefully. He gone. They hit the house, but it was empty. The man nodded, his shoulders dropping 2 inches as a massive weight lifted off him. He gone because of you? Vance asked. You talked him out of it. A pause. The prisoner looked at the floor, then met Vance's eyes. Yes, Vance swallowed. The lump in his throat was thick. You saved me. The prisoner's eyes softened completely. You saved my brother. No salute. No handshake. Just two men standing in a war neither of them fully understood. Recognizing the shared, fragile thread of humanity between them. EPI, low years later. Sitting in a quiet backyard back home. Vance would remember those 72 hours more vividly than any kinetic firefight. Pete had walked into that schoolhouse expecting hatred. He had expected an enemy combatant. Instead, he found a father figure trying to stop his brother from becoming a killer. War had drawn a thick, violent line between them. Humanity had erased it. And somewhere in Iraq, a man who once sat silent in a broken classroom walked free because he chose to guard life instead of destroy it. For 72 hours. The enemy wasn't the man in cuffs. It was the war itself.